Imagine a man who believed he was society's last line of defense against evil. A man who, much like Dexter Morgan from the hit TV series Dexter, took it upon himself to rid the world of those he deemed unworthy of redemption. But this wasn't just fiction. This was real life. Meet John Matthews, a vigilante whose thirst for justice blurred the line between right and wrong. His story is one of obsession, moral corruption, and a deadly pursuit of righteousness that shocked the world. Before we unravel this disturbing case, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell to stay updated on more gripping true crime stories. Now, let's dive into the mind of the real-life Dexter. To understand how John Matthews became the man he was, we must go back to the beginning. Born in 1975 in Chicago, he was raised in a strict yet seemingly normal household. But beneath the surface, there were signs of a growing darkness. His father, a military veteran, was a firm believer in discipline, structure, and unwavering moral values. John was taught that justice was absolute and that there were clear distinctions between good and evil. His mother, a devout churchgoer, reinforced the idea that morality was non-negotiable. Yet, despite their best efforts to raise a law-abiding son, John's interpretation of right and wrong began to take a more rigid and dangerous form. As a child, he displayed an unusual fascination with justice, often idolizing fictional vigilantes. Batman, the Punisher, and even classic Western heroes who took the law into their own hands became his idols. Unlike other children who eventually outgrew these fantasies, John took them to heart. He spent hours reading about crime and punishment, collecting newspaper clippings of unsolved cases, and creating detailed files on criminals in his neighborhood. By his teenage years, he had already shown an obsession with crime and punishment. He studied criminal cases intensely, analyzing how authorities failed to bring certain criminals to justice. This frustration only grew when he encountered real-life injustices in his community. Gang violence was rampant in his Chicago neighborhood, and John often saw criminals walk free due to legal loopholes, lack of evidence, or witness intimidation. Then came the breaking point. When his sister was assaulted by a repeat offender who walked free due to lack of evidence, John lost all faith in the legal system. The man who attacked her had a long history of violent crimes, yet he continued to slip through the cracks of the judicial system. John watched his sister struggle with the trauma, knowing that her attacker was still out there, unpunished. It was this experience that solidified his belief that the system was broken, and if no one else would fix it, he would. From that moment on, John's transformation began. He spent late nights researching forensic science, criminal psychology, and self-defense techniques. He immersed himself in combat training, learning martial arts, knife fighting, and even basic medical procedures to understand how to inflict and treat wounds. His obsession deepened as he read books on how serial killers evaded capture and how vigilantes throughout history had operated without being caught. His childhood fascination with justice had mutated into something far more sinister. He was no longer just an observer. He was preparing to become a participant. John's first real act of vigilantism came at the age of 22. A known drug dealer had been terrorizing his neighborhood, luring in kids and turning them into addicts. The police had been called on him multiple times, but he always found a way to avoid prosecution. One night, John decided to take matters into his own hands. He followed the dealer into a secluded alley and, using the element of surprise, ambushed him. The man was beaten severely, left unconscious but alive. John considered it a warning, a message to criminals that their actions would not go unpunished. When the dealer vanished from the streets after that attack, John took it as a sign that his methods worked. But the thrill of exerting control, of delivering justice, ignited something inside him. He realized that he could do what the police failed to do. And so, his mission escalated. By the time he was in his late 20s, John had refined his approach. He no longer relied on brute force alone. He stalked his targets meticulously, studying their routines, their weaknesses, and ensuring that their disappearances wouldn't raise immediate suspicion. His victims were carefully selected, criminals who had repeatedly escaped justice, those whom society had already deemed unredeemable. At first, police barely noticed the pattern. Murders in crime-ridden areas often went unsolved, and to some, these deaths seemed almost justified. But then, his methods became more sophisticated. He started leaving cryptic messages at crime scenes, taunting the police, daring them to catch him. One case stood out. In 2003, he targeted Michael Harris, a notorious sex offender who had walked free due to lack of evidence. The way he executed his victims was eerily methodical, restrained, precise, and almost surgical in nature. The media caught on. Headlines began drawing parallels to the fictional Dexter Morgan. Public opinion was divided. Some saw him as a monster, others as a necessary evil. But law enforcement saw him as a growing threat that had to be stopped. Despite his careful planning, all criminals make mistakes. And John Matthews was no exception. In 2007, authorities finally connected a critical piece of evidence to him. A single oversight that unraveled his deadly campaign. The arrest was dramatic. When police stormed his hideout, they found a chilling collection of notes detailing every victim, every plan. It was a serial killer's manifesto disguised as a vigilante's diary. Interrogators described him as eerily calm, even smug. He saw himself not as a criminal, but as a hero who had been wrongfully stopped. To this day, he believes he did the right thing. His trial was one of the most sensational in modern history, with media coverage painting him as either a misunderstood anti-hero or a cold-blooded murderer. As the trial progressed, psychologists debated whether Matthews was mentally unstable or simply a man consumed by his ideology. Some argued he was a textbook case of moral disengagement, while others pointed out the eerie similarities between his justifications and those of law enforcement officers who cross ethical lines. After weeks of heated testimony and nationwide speculation, the jury found him guilty. He was sentenced to life without parole, and though locked away, his legacy lingers on. Some still debate whether he was a savior or a monster. His case has inspired books, documentaries, and endless discussions on the nature of justice and morality. So what do we make of John Matthews? Was he a hero in the eyes of some? A psychopath in the eyes of others? Or was he simply a product of a broken system? History has shown us that society often glorifies vigilantes. From Batman to Dexter Morgan, we are fascinated by those who take justice into their own hands. But in reality, where do we draw the line? Leave a comment below. Do you think vigilante justice has a place in the modern world, or is it just another form of lawlessness? For more thought-provoking discussions like this, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications.